Welcome everyone to the Ontario Caregiver Organization's webinar series. These webinars bring together caregivers and subject matter experts to explore topics of interest to caregivers. We do this to support and engage chosen family, friends, neighbors, really anyone who's caring for someone else. My name is Katie Muirhead and I will be your moderator for today. We begin this gathering by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. And while we meet on a virtual platform with people joining us from across the province, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we each call home. The land I'm standing on today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendships of Indigenous peoples. As team members at the Ontario Caregiver Organization, we are learning about the lands from which we work, exploring how we can be meaningful allies and how we can support the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their culture. We invite you to take a moment to reflect on the land where you are. And if you're not familiar with that, we'll be sharing an interactive map that tells you which traditional territory your city or town sits on. You can find that at native-land.ca. Our webinar today is called Caregiving and Eating Disorders, Expect the Unexpected. Eating disorders are extremely complicated and impact not only the sufferer, but also family members in ways that are hard to imagine. Learning to expect the unexpected and to approach each day as a new beginning has been key for our presenters, Wendy and Michelle, in navigating their caregiving journeys. As our presenters share their respective caregiving experiences in today's webinar, you'll learn about the caregiver role in supporting recovery from an eating disorder and strategies and resources, including caring for yourselves as well as others. So I'd like to introduce you to our speakers today. Wendy Presco founded the National Initiative for Eating Disorders, or NEED, in 2012 after realizing that there was very little help available for her daughter who was suffering from this serious mental illness. Over the past 9 years, Wendy has been a strong advocate for change, speaking about the need for increased funding for early intervention and treatment, and about her role as a compassionate caregiver to her adult daughter, who continues to strive for inner peace and happiness. We're also joined by Michelle D'Amico, and Michelle has been a volunteer with NEED for the past 5 years and has been in the executive director role since November 2021, when she left her career in the federal government to work with NEED. Michelle is the parent of a young adult who developed an eating disorder as a teenager and is now committed to sharing her caregiving journey with others so they don't feel alone. Welcome, Wendy and Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you so much for having us today. And as Katie was just saying, the objectives of the webinar are to provide you with information about our caregiving experience and what the role of the caregiver in supporting wellness. We also want to provide you with some strategies to help you. Sorry about that. Some strategies and resources that are going to help you in your role as a caregiver, including caring for yourselves and caring for others. And in carrying out the above, we're going to share a little bit about our caregiving experiences and cycles, what we experienced and felt as caregivers, what we didn't know but wish we did, our caregiving strategies, and available resources and services. And as mentioned earlier, a question and answer session will follow. So before sharing our caregiving stories and the coping strategies that we've developed along the way, we thought that we'd start with a brief description of what an eating disorder is, and from our perspectives, why recovery can be so difficult. Eating disorders are complex, biologically based brain disorders that result from the perfect storm of factors such as mental health, genetic and biological factors, and the social environment. There's a lot of risk factors, but rarely one cause or trigger. Eating disorders can affect people of any age, race, gender, or sexual orientation. They are often diagnosed in teenage years and young adults, but many people are first diagnosed with an eating disorder in later adulthood. Sometimes the first signs and symptoms develop at a much earlier age. So it may be just surprising to you, but approximately 2.7 million Canadians live with an eating disorder. And that eating disorders have the second highest death rate of any mental illness, second only to opioid addiction. And of those suffering with an eating disorder, approximately 20% of people with anorexia and 25 to 35% of people with bulimia may attempt suicide in their lifetime. So recovery is possible, but it's really complex because signs and symptoms can be subtle. Individuals affected by eating disorders can display a wide array of symptoms, and some symptoms can be more obvious than others. Dramatic weight loss, a refusal to eat, retreating to the bathroom for long periods after meals. And there are also more subtle signs that can be overlooked. For example, I never realized the early physical signs, such as being cold, losing hair, not sleeping, and dizziness.
There are also red flags that can alert you that could be happening, like loose and baggy clothing, scrutinizing labels, becoming a vegetarian, but not all vegetarians have an eating disorder, but it's also a way to restrict some food.
There also may be denial, especially at the beginning, that anything is wrong. For my husband and myself, the thought that my daughter could have an eating disorder never even crossed our minds. Based on our understanding at the time, eating disorders only happen to other families and not ours. We weren't like that. We were so wrong.
For us, this came as a total shock. We felt that the bottom was falling out of our lives. What now and what's next?
Recovery is also difficult because eating disorders are a serious mental illness. And with like any serious illness, recovery can be difficult. Stigma may also play a role in reaching out for help. There's also fear of food, fear of gaining weight, fear of losing control, and fear of judgment. Wendy and I have also realized that the impact of eating disorders on families can be significant. When we first recognized that our daughters had an eating disorder, we quickly learned that this mental illness not only impacted the individual suffering, but also their families. Our lives quickly became desperately focused on finding help for our kids, and once we did, on maintaining that support. Both of us have met families along the way who have found themselves spending a significant amount of money on securing treatment for their child. Personally, my husband and I were extremely fortunate that we had the financial ability for me to leave work for a period of time. I know that a lot of families aren't able to do that. So I'm now going to pass the mic over to Wendy, who's going to talk about her caregiving experience.
Thank you, Michelle. Before I begin, I just think it's important for you to know that today is the 3rd of February, which is part of Eating Disorders Awareness Week, which usually goes which always goes from the 1st to the 7th of February in Canada. It's also known as EDOR. There are many events happening throughout Canada. You will see a link to NEDIC to find all the events. Just to also let you know that I am a wife, a mom, and granny, and I will be sharing my caregiving role about our youngest daughter as an adult. Our 36-year-old daughter lives at home, and yes, I am constantly affected by her life on a daily basis. As a mom, you cannot help but feel your child's pain, no matter the age. I do my best to support her wellness. She's never been in such a good headspace confronting her challenges. This webinar is all about caregivers, but I also want to share her words with you so you really get a glimpse of how someone with an eating disorder can feel. It is called My Eating Disorder Is Not. It's not a diet, nor a lifestyle, or a senseless teenage phase. It's not stupid, it's not silly, nor the latest weight loss craze. It's not a passion, not a hobby, and it's not some twisted game. It's fatal, yes, it's deadly. It's an illness of the brain. It's not fun and it's not funny, not intentional and not a choice. It kills you slowly every day and overtakes your voice. It's not my fault, it's not intentional, not some spiteful sleight of hand. It's an anxiety-driven, fear-based disease that too few understand. It's not a joke and it's not selfish, it's the furthest thing from vain. It's a drastic telltale of no self-esteem and unparalleled burning shame. It's not malicious nor dismissive, not distinct to middle-class white girls. It's a disease like any other, ensnaring every age, class, and race around the world. It's not uncommon, it's not weird, it dates back centuries, nothing new. It's the single most fatal mental illness, which all statistics prove to be true. Telling an anorexic to just eat is like expecting a deaf person to just talk. Telling a binge eater to just stop is like demanding a paraplegic to just walk. Telling a bulimic to just eat normally is cruel, ignorant, and frustrating. Telling an exercise addict to just sit down is like telling schizophrenics, just stop hallucinating. This illness is biological and genetic. It's like cancer of mind and thought. It doesn't come from nowhere. You are either born susceptible or not. If you think this is a ridiculous phase, or that we'd be fine if we just tried, then explain to me the shocking rate of sufferers committing suicide. If eating disorders were just a stupid choice, or you think that we're just lying, then why are millions desperate for help while millions more are dying? I know it's hard to digest that poem, but that's how she felt, and that's how she actually wrote this poem in response to some ridiculous article in the paper that blamed eating disorder as a passion. Over the decades, our relationship with our daughter has been an emotional roller coaster with many ups and downs, twists and turns, highs and gut-wrenching lows. We've learned to roll with the negatives and aim to focus on all the positive milestones that take place. I'm now going to pass the mic on to Michelle for her story.
Thank you so much, Wendy. So when I reflect on my caregiving journey, and especially at the beginning, I know that I wasn't doing well. When my husband and I first noticed that something wasn't right, I reached out to our family doctor to try to get help for my daughter. Although he ordered every test that he could possibly think of, over the course of about a year, the possibility of an eating disorder never came up. My daughter was extremely ill, and I was overwhelmed and scared. Also, I was working full-time and was suddenly faced with going to doctor's appointments, getting calls from the school guidance counselor and school administrators. And then financial concerns came into play when I realized that I would have to leave work, but I didn't know how we were going to manage without my income. I was feeling a lot of pressure at work to perform at the same level as I had in the past, even though I didn't have the time, focus, and energy. I tried working flexible hours, part-time, and working from home or even the hospital, but I eventually realized that I needed to leave work. I went through a period of time when my daughter was in hospital and where I was having a really difficult time coping. For a period of about 8 weeks, I was there most days from 7:30 in the morning until 9 or 10 at night. There were times when I arrived at home and I couldn't remember the route that I took to get home. I also drank way too much wine at the time, thinking that it was a good way of relaxing at the end of a hard day. But in retrospect, it probably wasn't the best coping mechanism. When my daughter was first discharged from the hospital for the first time, I was excited and I was thinking that our lives were going to get back to normal. But I quickly learned that it was the only beginning of what would be a very long path to her recovery. So What we experience, both Wendy and myself as caregivers, is to expect the unexpected. Although our caregiving journeys have been different, given that Wendy's daughter is a young adult and my daughter was much younger when she first became ill, there are many similarities. So firstly, we were both confused and experienced many things, including frustration, fear, anger, guilt, shame, and blame. Frustration in getting care for our daughters. And for me at the time, I was angry with healthcare providers and with the system for not having the resources to provide the care that she needed. At the time, I viewed this as her illness not being taken seriously, and I felt like we were being brushed off and judged. But over time, I learned that healthcare professionals do care, and that, in my opinion, they're doing the very best that they can with the resources and time that they have. And there was fear as well, fear of what was going to happen next. Fear was constant, but it was especially difficult during key transition points, such as going back to work and my daughter going away to school. I remember when I returned to work for the first time. Although I knew that it was really important for my daughter's recovery and for my mental well-being as well, I was terrified to be away from her. I remember the first day back at work, standing there, everyone welcoming me back, and I managed to keep a smile on my face, but all I wanted to do was go home. I felt the sweat rolling down my back, and as soon as I had a chance, I went down to the changing room and building and I cried.
I just want to address more about shame and blame. I remember my husband and I putting our arms around each other, crying on each other's shoulders. What should we have done differently? What could we have done differently? Why? Why did this happen? We've got two older children who were fine, happily married, no trauma, and all the questions and thoughts kept running through our minds.
There was also stigma. Prior to my daughter's illness, I wasn't aware of how stigma, either real or perceived, would impact me. I had a lot of self-doubt, questions, and judgments about myself as a parent and in my ability to support my daughter along the way. This led to a constant internal dialogue about what people thought about me and how our family would be treated if people found out about my daughter's illness. I felt that I was being judged by our hospital-based care team, by friends, and by my colleagues at work. In retrospect, I now realize that probably wasn't the case. But at the time, my thoughts about what I was experiencing as a parent and caregiver were very real to me.
I did not feel the stigma the same as Michelle was feeling. Some families do, and we did not. Our thinking was we didn't want her to be labeled and looked at any differently from anyone else in our family. We told closest friends who were family to us what we were going through, but I did not feel the shame or embarrassment that I know a lot of people to this very day do feel.
There was also a change in family dynamics that I didn't expect. I think that at the time, I expected my family to pull together to support each other. In a way, we did, but it was extremely difficult and complex. There was a lot of conflict, a lot of family conflict due to, in large part, I think, to different opinions about what support and treatment really looked like and how I was doing in carrying out my role as a parent and caregiver.
We had to let go of negative support. I eventually gave up trying to help those close to us to understand what was going on. Eating disorders are not a choice. She did not want this, and she did not want to live like this.
Wendy and I were both surprised by how difficult it was to access care and provide professional support. For Wendy, it took 5 years before she could find a psychologist for her daughter. And for me, it wasn't until my daughter's physical life was at risk that we could access the mental health support that she just so desperately needed. For both of us as well, there was a change in how we approach self-care. We all know the importance of self-care, but when you have a loved one who's ill, it takes on a whole different meaning. Prior to my daughter's illness, I was pretty active. I played hockey and soccer and loved to get out for a run a couple of times a week. Once I became a caregiver to an ill child, that completely changed. Self-care was then about getting enough sleep to get through the day.
Self-care just seems like such an easy concept to say to somebody or to suggest for somebody to do, but it used to really depend on the day. Now I do practice self-care every single day by going for a walk, swimming, doing yoga, or even playing just outside with our puppy in the snow.
We both also found that we didn't always have the family support that we were looking for. I realize now, though, that it was because my extended family wasn't living our experience and didn't fully understand how the eating disorder was impacting our lives. I also experienced a shift in friendships, and even 6 years later, there are a few people that I haven't reconnected with, but that's okay though. In my opinion, one of my key learnings was the importance of modeling behavior. For me, this meant eating meals at the same time as my daughter and removing all of the exercise equipment from the house. And to this day, I do the same thing when she's at home in terms of eating, a way of continuing to provide support and to let her know that I'm still here for her.
For me, her behavior was less of an issue as her symptoms kept her isolating a lot of the time during her early eating disorder years. To this day, rigidness with mealtime is clockwork for her. We usually eat dinner together and spend some time at the table chatting as our way of supporting her after a meal.
So what we didn't know and we wish we did at the beginning, there's a lot of things, but some of the things that really stuck out to us is that it can happen to my family. My family, someone I love, can develop an eating disorder, and it doesn't just happen to other people. Resistance to accepting treatment is a reality. Initially, I couldn't understand how someone could refuse treatment and refuse medication that could help.
It is so tough when she finally asks for help, and it's a huge referral process that could take weeks and months. And when the call comes for treatment, her anxiety would hit the roof and she would say no.
Something else that we didn't know is that relapse is normal and expected. Recovery doesn't happen in a straight line. Going backwards can happen. As a parent caregiver, the scary part is that you don't know how far the slide backwards will go. Also, your loved one may push you away and say that they hate you. I didn't expect this to happen. If they lash out, though, it's not because of who they are. Don't take it personally, because it's really the eating disorder. I think it's important to remember that you know your child the best and their true personality before the eating disorder took over and disrupted your lives.
My daughter's lashing out usually she took it out on me. And I also, as Michelle has just mentioned, it was not her personality doing this, it was the eating disorder voices in her head. And she would always, even to this very day, feel so guilty and apologize.
Another thing that I wish I knew at the beginning is how important my role as an advocate for her treatment would be. I had to learn to advocate for my daughter's care. Taking on this role pushed me out of my comfort zone, and it was exhausting, but I really believe that it made a difference. I had to fight to get her the hospital-based care that she so desperately needed, and I needed to fight to keep her there.
And my advocacy for her was, she had asked me many times to sit in with her at some appointments, to be her voice as she could not talk, and also to listen what was being said because she could not follow the conversation.
Both Wendy and I also learned about the importance of preparation. And this means finding out as much as you can about eating disorders, and don't be afraid to ask about what's happening and to ask for help and support.
I found a support group for moms and couples the most helpful, as well as a therapist for ourselves, to keep both my husband and I on the same line, on the same page.
So finally, I learned that self-harm may play a role. Binging, cutting, suicidal actions, purging, etc. And also that there may be other accompanying mental illnesses such as anxiety and depression and others. So finally, we wanted to talk to you about our caregiving strategies. We've learned that it's really common to feel helpless, confused, frustrated, frustrated and exhausting at times. And here are a few things that we've really learned about along the way. One of the things is to have self-compassion and to be patient with yourself.
Don't beat yourself up. You're dealing with an individual who could be malnourished and starved and is truly not capable of listening to your words of wisdom. It goes straight over their heads. Listen to your child, and if they let you, be demonstrative and show your love.
Don't blame yourself for not being able to heal your loved one's eating disorder. Sometimes all that you can do is be there when the illness will accept it. I had to allow myself to cry and to let it all out when I had to. Also, take things as they happen. I know that's easier said than done. Accept the illness, acknowledge how challenging things can be at home, and find small moments for yourself. This can mean walking a dog, swimming, yoga, or even just a few minutes alone in a washroom. Take you finding time to breathe. Also, educate your friends and family and colleagues and try to, or at least try to. It's not easy. Follow your instincts as well. Trust your intuition. If you think that something's not right, you're probably right. That's something that was so key to me over the last number of years, is if I got the sense that something was wrong, then to act on that. Also, we'd mentioned before, don't blame yourself. You're an important part of your loved one's wellness. And never give up hope. Advocate, learn, and commit. And finally, find someone that you can talk to, whether that's a close friend, a support group, or another parent. Finally, here are a few resources that we'd like to share with you that you can turn to learn more about being a caregiver to someone with an eating disorder. The resources also have information about support groups for caregivers.
Michelle and I would like to thank the Ontario Caregiver Organization for giving us this opportunity to share and open up conversations about our population of caregivers. Thank you all so much.
Wonderful. Wow. Thank you, Michelle and Wendy. So much wonderful information shared today. As a reminder for folks, the recording and the slides will be sent out to everybody. So thank you so much for teaching us so much about this complex disorder and being so candid and open in sharing your caregiving experience. For folks that want more information on eating disorders, please visit the National Initiative for Eating Disorders website. Thanks again for joining us today. So we do have some time for questions, folks. So I think my colleague has put in the chat, if you have questions or comments or feedback, please feel free to put them in there. And Michelle, maybe what I can do is ask you to stop sharing your slide right now. We can see everyone's face all at the same time, as big as possible. Wonderful, thank you. So I'm just scrolling through the chat here to see, maybe what I'll do is I'll start off with a question that I know I had while listening to your presentation. If somebody is, and this is for both Wendy and Michelle, so feel free to jump in. If someone's worried or they suspect that their loved one has an eating disorder, but they're not really sure, they've never encountered this before, are there specific strategies to approaching that person? How do you start that conversation, which I think would be a very difficult and stressful one? And I'm wondering, with your experience, if you have any suggestions for folks on how to sort of introduce this to your loved one and explore that with them.
Sure, Michelle, I mean, we can both share the answer. I'm sure we both got lots of insight into this. I think, first of all, it depends on the age of the person. If it's obviously in the pediatric world, it's easier to take that person that you're concerned about to their pediatrician. If it's somebody who is already past the pediatrics and in their adolescence or early adult life, then just, I think, putting an arm around them, talking to them, just saying you are worried, you're concerned about something, they're not themselves. But whatever you do, do not mention a single thing about food. Don't even bring that into consideration. Don't talk about the food, because food is a symptom of the illness. Just speak to them lovingly, like, I'm concerned about you. Is something worrying you? Just know that I'm here for you when you want to talk to somebody. Do you want to go and talk to somebody else? Michelle?
The only thing that I would add is, to acknowledge that something isn't right. If you think that someone that a loved one has an eating disorder, turning your eyes the other way isn't going to help. So as Wendy said, reach out for resources, acknowledge that something isn't right. Speak to your loved one. And this is just based on my experience, because, not being a clinical professional, just a parent and a caregiver, but it's really important to just show love and support and care, and to let your child know that you're there for them. And like I said, not turning your head the other way, but actually reaching out for help and more information.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. And we have a lot of questions rolling in now, and some of them sort of build on that question and your experience. And I'm looking at my list that it's coming in on my phone here, and I'm wondering if you can share what's something that you found helpful that a healthcare provider did. So in what I assume was a very complicated experience working within healthcare, maybe you had some really positive experiences and maybe you had some not so positive experiences. Is there something that really stands out to all of you that was really a great step from a healthcare provider?
I'll answer the question, I guess, to start with. So my perspective is, my background is from the perspective of having a child who developed an eating disorder as a teenager. There's a lot of restrictions, I guess, that medical professionals have around confidentiality. So one of the best things I think is that both the pediatrician, the family doctor, and then eventually the team, when she received hospital-based cares, found ways to include me in her treatment and care. Things such as, although confidentiality does come into place, the doctor would get my daughter's permission to call me in for the last 5 minutes, maybe, of an appointment, and say right in front of my daughter, is it okay if I share this information with your parent? And that was so key because it involved us in her care. And when that doesn't happen, parents are really, really important. They play a really important role in recovery. But if you're not part of that healthcare team, it's really difficult to provide that role.
So I can answer that from an adult perspective, because unfortunately, we did not have a team to help us. When she was hospitalized for rehydration, the doctors would talk to her behind a curtain. I could hear the conversation because I was standing right by. And I know it's not their fault, but statements that were made to her or questions that were asked were completely, it was like nobody knew that she was lying there because she had an eating disorder. And it really was because of lack of the emergency doctor's education. It was not their fault.
Yeah.
So we found it difficult. I can say the only two people that really did include us was when, as I mentioned earlier on, was when I would take her to her family doctor and she would ask me to come in with her because she was really not well enough to understand what was happening, or she actually would turn to me, my daughter, and ask me, what do I think? And the other person that was extremely helpful was her psychiatrist, who also encouraged, and she wanted me to sit there and be with her through sessions for years, for probably 3 or 4 years that I can remember, until she was able to handle the sessions on her own. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult. And it's, as Michelle mentioned, confidentiality is huge. The doctor can look straight past you, especially in a hospital situation, and emerge. So it's a wish. It's a wish to have a team of people.
Yeah, you raise a really important point around privacy and consent, right? When you're supporting a younger person or a young adult, you get to be part of that conversation as a caring parent, family member, whomever. But as soon as they're an adult, then we get into the complexities of integration of caregivers into the space, which I know happens in other sectors as well, but this particularly is true of this population where they might need you as support, or they do need you as support, and you have a lot of really helpful information and insights to add. So I can see how that would be very frustrating to sort of be left in the waiting room and not a part of that treatment or that intervention or the conversation.
Katie, just to add what you just said around confidentiality, one of the things that really surprised me, that if a loved one's or even a child, an adolescent's physical life is not at risk, they can refuse you to be part of the conversation, and they can refuse treatment. And that was one of the biggest shocks to me, that, someone who's 16, 17 years old can say, no, mom, you can't be involved. You can't talk to my doctor. And there's nothing they can do about, nothing you can do about that. So that's why, when I mentioned that, finding a way to be part of the care team and to have the medical professional find a way to include you is so key.
It is really important. And we have some resources at OCO in terms of how caregivers can become more of a part of the healthcare team for caregivers, but also for healthcare providers. But that education is so important. And I would suspect for a lot of people that is the shock and surprise of, wait a minute, you're 16 and you're telling me to leave? What's happening? I've been here the whole time. And I would think that, some of the suggestions in that case, if somebody is shutting you out, there's another great opportunity as a caregiver to be seeking supports for yourself as you're navigating this experience, to keep your energy, to keep your, your own mental health and well-being healthy while you're trying to navigate through. And you talked, Michelle, a little bit about how you first reached for the wine and then you realize that maybe you still do a little bit, but that you realize there may be some other healthy coping strategies for caregivers while they're, navigating this experience, the education, the support groups, all of these different great resources that we're going to be sharing with everyone. So thank you for acknowledging that, because I think sometimes people feel some of their own shame around how they cope. And there's no right or wrong way, but there are some maybe best practices in how we can cope a little bit differently. So I'm looking at all of these beautiful questions that are coming in, and I'm wondering if maybe there's been a few questions around, I think sometimes when we talk about or we think about eating disorders as a layperson, as somebody who's not immersed in this with lived experience or does this as part of their work, we think about anorexia, bulimia, or eating disorders where someone is experiencing weight loss. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that there are a lot of other types of eating disorders and subsequent other disordered actions that people can have, like excessive exercise or other sort of practices that maybe support their weight reduction, or in some cases, some people may have disordered eating where they eat certain things or too much. And I don't know if you want to shed a little bit of light on some of the nuances within the umbrella of eating disorders for our audience.
I can mention binge eating disorder, which I know is probably the most common eating disorder. But as far as definitions and going into further details about them, I think people can really look that up on other websites, because I know that Michelle and I are really we're not clinicians, and I'd rather not get into that kind of a conversation.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. We did have a question around, where is it in my list here? Avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. Yeah. And I'm guessing that is a specific type of disorder that falls under the umbrella. So we are all making the statement, we are not clinicians nor doctors. We do not diagnose or prescribe. And so we're not able to necessarily give those kinds of concrete answers, but the resources that we're sharing today may help lead you to some places where you can find some information.
Yeah, for sure.
And one of the resources, that is being shared is from the National Eating Disorder Information Center, NEDIC, and just going there, or, the links that we provided in our presentation can take you to more information on those.
We've got a question here. In addition to conversation and family time, what suggested modeling happens at the family dinner table that models a positive relationship with food?
I guess I can speak to that a bit from my experience. So one of the things that we learned along the way is the idea that all food is good food and that there is no bad food. It's all part of what we eat, and that there shouldn't be judgment around food. And like I said, this is from my own experience. So at the dinner table, having a wide variety of foods, having, changing things different days, including desserts, including a glass of milk or a glass of pop or a glass of juice, and modeling that, the whole family eating together, and maybe, the mother or the father not saying, no, I've had enough today. I'm not going to have that. So it's really eating together as a family. And what we learned along the way as well is when it was more difficult to eat, and there were times when it would take 2 hours to get through a meal, but you sit there together, incorporate distractions. We played a lot of Wheel of Fortune on the iPad, so things like that. So incorporating those distractions into mealtime, sitting together and eating, no judgment as to the types of foods either. Wendy?
Yeah, because of the age of our daughter, I did not have to go through sitting with her through meals on a daily basis. And she really started off with anorexia and then bulimia. So we did not do any of that meal sitting that Michelle, and I know hundreds and hundreds of other parents, caregivers have done, and it can be very, very brutal. I've heard horrible stories. It's really tough. But one thing that I never ever did was I never had a scale that was visible. I used to keep a scale tucked away, and all it was used for was to weigh a suitcase if we were going to be traveling. That was the use of my scale. I never ever mentioned the word diet. It was just not part of who we were. I just, I fed my kids as healthy and in a good way as a mom would try her best to do. But any other words relating to diet or losing weight, it was never, ever a discussion in our home, ever. Never, ever.
Yeah.
So I think, just putting away some triggering objects and maybe books. I never had diet books or how to lose weight in 5 days. Any of those kind of, harmful resources could also be a way to just get rid of those kinds of things. We don't need them around us.
Yeah. And when you just mentioned not having a scale in the house, and that's even something that, our extended family members have done, when we were going over there, making sure that scales are putting away. So there's no way that they could be accessed by my daughter at any point.
And you did talk a little bit about family dynamics, which is also a really common challenge in the caregiver space, where there may be some really well-meaning family members or extended family, but maybe they don't have all the education, or they have their own approach to how these kinds of challenging situations should be managed. And I'm wondering if you have any tips for folks that maybe have those extended family members that are working to try to be supportive, but it might be counterproductive, or it might not be as helpful as they think it might be, or they're taking a different approach. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions for the group on that?
I can jump into that, Michelle, if you want. It's a really good question, and the timing of this is so good, because just honestly, on the weekend, my daughter and I sat down together and we came up with lists of words and phrases that family members could really, that she felt if family members said to her, would really sort of strike a chord in her. And I've got them right in front of me. I can just read a couple to you. Tell family members words or phrases. How is today for you? I love you. I know things are hard. Do you want to talk? I'm here for you. Do you need a hug? Make them feel like they exist. Don't be scared of the eating disorder. Don't let it scare you away. And, you know, coming out of this conversation we just recently had on the weekend, it's really important for family members or friends to hear these kinds of words that really she is feeling and wanting to be included. And another thing she also mentioned to me was, if you don't know what to say, it's still better to say something meaningful than to ignore. Never, ever make comments or suggestions about food or body weight, shape, or how they look. Talk, and we've always done this, talk about from the neck up. I can see the sadness or pain in your eyes. Wow, your eyes are sparkling, your hair is shining. So all these kind of inclusive comments just make her feel like she's a person and part of the family, which I think a lot of the time family members don't maybe do or think to do.
I love that comment from the neck up. I think that's a really good key message or thought for folks to take away in terms of how we interact and connect with anyone, especially a person with this kind of disorder. So thank you. That's a really great tip and suggestion.
And another word, I can just jump in here as well. Another word that really, and I know this not only from her, but from others who've been in a group together at one stage of our lives, is the word healthy. Healthy does not have a good meaning for people who are suffering with an eating disorder. To them, healthy equals I am fit. So when I asked her about that, you know, like, what do you want people to say? And I know that, you know, when you say to somebody, wow, you're looking healthy, you're often referring to their bodies, not to how they are actually feeling in their minds. And she said to me, you know, like, rather say you're vibrant, you're alive, I can see your eyes are sparkling, but try to avoid that word healthy, because it does not have the right connotations that you or I think would maybe mean healthy.
Yeah. Just adding to that, just a story when my daughter was in the hospital, and we knew one of the physicians just from the community, and she came up to her in the hallway and she grabbed her cheeks and went, "You look so good." That was a tailspin moment. That was a backslide, and that lasted for a while. So I don't think, as Wendy said, that's not just something we need to avoid doing in hospital-based care, but also at any point to support anyone that we love, whether they have an eating disorder or they don't.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the big things I've learned from, one of the many things I've learned from your talk today is that we don't know. You know, there are so many people out there that are experiencing an eating disorder, and we don't talk about it. We don't know that that's happening. So having what one would consider an innocent interaction, like pinching a cheek or saying, "Wow, you look really healthy," we don't know what's really going on behind the scenes and with their thinking and how they're feeling. So really great tips and suggestions.
Yeah, and sometimes also their perception during the course of the illness really gets very skewed, you know, and what you are saying or what you are meaning to say or saying it, you think you're saying it in a good way, is doing so much harm. So you never know what's going on with people around you. You've really got to sort of stop this conversation about how you look and stop, you know, seeing what people are wearing, what they're clothing, or just talk about something else. Climate change, let's do something else.
With everything happening in the world, I'm sure we can find something else to talk about.
Climate change, right.
Great suggestion. So we do have just a couple of minutes left. And so I thought maybe what I would ask is if you could share a little bit about what you, in your experience, you think are some of the more effective or good strategies or treatment or therapeutic options. So there was some questions around medications. You talked about therapy, psychotherapy, psychiatry, different approaches. And I'm wondering if you can share, you know, do we start at the GP and then do we move outward from there? Is there sort of a recommended approach to bringing in a treatment or therapeutic team for your loved one?
I can take a shot at jumping in there. I think the GP is usually the first point of contact, right? And it's really important to reach out to him or her for support. And with that, it's also important to advocate, I think, as a caregiver for next steps. If you think that your loved one isn't getting what they need from their GP, ask for a referral. Push for a referral to a psychiatrist or to a specialist. Something else that I just thought of that I wanted to share about treatment options, I guess, and support options is we, at the very beginning, when we weren't sure what was happening with my daughter's health, I reached out to our employee assistance program. I was working in the federal government, which was wonderful. My only advice is to check in with them and create that kind of care team approach with them as well. And the reason I'm saying that is when my daughter first told them that the counselor, that she thought she may have an eating disorder, the counselor said to her, no, you don't. Continue to pursue other physical related reasons for your illness. So I guess, it's just check into the credentials. Not all counselors are the same. They don't all have the same background in learning. So that would be, I think that would be really something important to mention. And as I talked about, that being part of the care team, trying to insert yourself in there in whatever way you possibly can, advocating, sometimes my experience, not taking no for an answer. There was a point in time where my daughter was potentially going to get kicked out of a program that she, really desperately needed. I basically lost it, and they ended up keeping her in the program. But when she graduated from it, a few members of the care team told me that they were sometimes scared of me. They were scared of how hard I was advocating. They were scared of my tears. But at the end of that, they said to me but that was okay. And they called me a mother bear. And they actually said, but they love mother bears because they're the ones who are fighting the hardest. So I think it's important, just my message in that is to not quit and not give up if your instinct is telling you that more needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. I can't really comment like that with our experience, because we were, in the adult world, and there were times when she was kept against her will, which didn't help matters at all. It's difficult. Getting into treatment is a huge, long process. I know that there are other sort of out of the box thinking types of treatments, like equine therapy or art therapy or yoga. And that is something that people can obviously, if their loved one has that interest, to do. But getting into a hospital program is a bit of a nightmare, to say the least. But there are so many amazing, amazing community programs that are running at their limit, and I can totally share them with you out loud. Sheena's Place, Body Brave, Danielle's Place, all these are on our website, on the resource slide that Michelle sent. And a lot of what they're offering is free. You don't have to be diagnosed, or your loved one doesn't have to have a diagnosis to go to their program. And families can go, parents can go, a mom can go. To me, Sheena's Place, when our daughter got sick, really a long time ago, was a lifesaver for me. So look into these programs. There's a lot of amazing, amazing community programs happening across the country. And I really encourage people to look out and to reach out to them.
Yeah. I saw something pop up in the chat about family-based therapy. And from my perspective, that's something that we did as well during hospital-based treatment. And I think that it was really important, and it helped us a lot. It helped my husband and I and my daughters and my other sibling, or my other daughter, to really understand what was happening and to learn how to say those things that would build her up and help, as opposed to bring her down. We actually practiced those things. We did modeling, and we practiced giving, one example, real hugs that really mean something and show love and care. So those things were beneficial for us from the family-based therapy.
Thank you.
We didn't experience family-based therapy, so and I know it works so well for so many people.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's so individualized that what may work for some doesn't work for all, and so there may be some really great successes with family-based therapy for some, and maybe not so much for others. And it's really about exploring and understanding your options and seeing what's going to be the right fit for your person, but also your family and the people that are supporting that individual as well. Mhm. I'm looking at the time and we have lots of wonderful comments coming in. So many, people thanking you. Thank you for sharing your stories. I'm trying to be a mama bear. A lot of gratitude in the chat for your vulnerability and your honesty and sharing what is so personal with everyone today. So I do want to thank you again for joining us and expressing, your experiences and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. Thank you so much.